My name's Jim Harper, and until a few weeks ago, I thought I'd retire with a wrench in one hand and a safety checklist in the other. I'm 59 years old. Been the lead foreman at Greenfield Manufacturing for over 22 years, longer than some of the new hires have been alive. I ran the floor like a damn orchestra conductor. No flair, no drama. Just discipline, consistency, and a deep respect for the machinery and the men who worked it. Greenfield wasn't some trendy startup or flashy company. We made equipment for the chemical industry, specialty pumps, pressure vessels, mixers, and other stuff the public never thinks about but can kill a man if done wrong. We didn't build gadgets, we built the backbone of industry. Our parts ended up in plants all over the country, coast to coast, from Louisiana to Long Island. My job wasn't just making sure things got built. It was making sure nobody went home in a body bag. I took that seriously. I developed most of the current safety protocols myself. I spent weekends rewriting maintenance schedules and training young guys who barely knew the difference between a torque wrench and a coffee thermos. I stayed late. Missed birthdays. Cancelled vacations. For what? To make sure that place ran like a goddamn Swiss watch. And for 22 years, it did. Not a single major accident on my watch. Not one. That's why, when Julia from HR called me into her office that morning, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were finally giving me that lifetime recognition plaque I always joked about. Or maybe someone had screwed up a report again and they needed me to fix it. But the second I opened the door and saw Adam Gray sitting there, I knew something was off. Adam was the new CEO. Young guy. Early 40s, maybe. Hair that looked like it came with product already in it. Always wore these slim-fit suits that made him look like he belonged in a startup pitch meeting, not a factory built in 1972. He'd only been at Greenfield for 5 months, and I could count on one hand how many times he'd stepped foot on the production floor. When he did, it was always for show, press photos, handshakes with clients. I once caught him recoiling from the smell of hot lubricant like it was radioactive. That should have been my first warning. I took a seat. Julia gave me this look, kind of tight-lipped, half apologetic. She fiddled with a manila folder. Adam leaned forward, smiling like a car salesman. "Jim, we appreciate everything you've done for this company," he said, "but the board has decided to restructure operations moving forward." My gut dropped. Restructure? "We're eliminating redundant positions," he said, smooth as butter. "Your role as lead foreman is one of them." I looked at Julia. Her face said nothing, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Adam kept going like he was reading from a brochure. "We've hired someone to take over as operational supervisor, a young guy, Matt Thomas. Just graduated from Ohio State. He's got a business background, which aligns with our data-focused initiative." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're replacing me, with someone who's never even walked a line?" I asked, barely keeping the edge out of my voice. "He's got a lot of potential," Adam replied. "And he's very sharp with analytics. It's a different world now, Jim. We're moving toward a more agile, lean production model." Buzzwords. Empty, sterile buzzwords. I sat there staring at this man, this kid, wondering if he had any idea what it actually meant to run a floor. Did he know the sound a pump made before it failed? Did he know what molten sealant smelled like right before a rupture? Did he know how to talk down a panicked 20-year-old when a pressure valve jammed? Of course not. But none of that mattered. I wasn't part of the future anymore. Adam handed me a folder. "You'll have 60 days to transfer your responsibilities. Your pension will be honored in monthly installments, starting the 1st of next quarter." That was it. 2 decades condensed into a manila folder and a polite smile. I didn't say much. I think Julia expected me to lash out, or maybe cry. But I just nodded, stood up, and walked out. I drove home without saying a word, numb. Like someone had pressed mute on the world. I took the long way back. Through the south side of Middletown, where the old steel plants used to hum day and night. My dad worked in one of those, back when factories meant something. Most of them are empty now, graffitied shells with weeds growing up through the loading docks. The ghosts of American industry. And now, I was being added to the pile. As I sat at a red light near where my dad's plant used to stand, I looked down at my hands. Scarred, stained, calloused. Hands that had built something. That had trained men, prevented disasters, saved lives. Now, they were hands that had been deemed obsolete. They didn't fire me because I was bad at my job. They fired me because I wasn't young. Because I wasn't shiny and digital. Because I didn't speak in graphs and KPIs. I pulled into my driveway. The sun was setting. I could hear the hum of distant lawnmowers. Someone was grilling a few houses down. For a moment, everything looked normal. But nothing was normal. I sat there in my truck for a long time, staring at the house I'd paid off early with overtime checks and holiday shifts. My wife would be home soon. I didn't know how I was going to tell her. But I did know one thing, I wasn't going to go out quietly. Not after everything I gave that place. Let them see what happens when they replace wisdom with data, flesh and blood with Excel sheets. The clock was ticking. And Greenfield was about to learn what it meant to cut the wrong man loose. I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour before I told Susan. She was home by then, had just changed out of her scrubs, hair tied back, already digging through the fridge for leftovers. She works at the local clinic, not far from the plant. She's seen broken bones, stitched wounds, and more than a few burned hands that came out of Greenfield's floor. She always told me she worried less when she knew I was there, keeping things from going sideways. When I finally said the words, "They're letting me go," she stopped what she was doing, slowly turned to look at me, and just blinked. I could tell she didn't understand at first. It didn't compute. Not me. Not Jim Harper. "You're, what?" she asked, like she was waiting for the punchline. "They called it a restructuring. Said my position's being eliminated. Got 2 months to train some new guy. Fresh out of college. Doesn't know a damn thing about the floor." Susan sat down across from me, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just listened. That's one of the things I've always admired about her, she doesn't panic. She's the kind of woman who wraps up a gash while asking about your insurance plan. But I could see the worry settling behind her eyes like dust in sunlight. "What about your pension?" "Installments. Monthly. Starting next quarter." She exhaled slowly, nodding. "You gonna be okay?" "Don't know," I said. "But I'm not going to just hand over my keys and pretend none of this matters. I built that place, Sue. I kept it standing. And now they're tossing me aside like I'm just in the way." I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the meeting in my head. The look on Adam Grace's face, like he was doing me a favor. Like I was some old horse being sent to pasture, and I should be grateful for the grass. The next morning, I went in early. Earlier than usual. Just to walk the floor. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. I watched the machines cycle through their programs, listened to the thrum of pistons and belts, and for the first time in my life, it felt like none of it belonged to me anymore. That day, they introduced Matt Thomas to the staff. He was polite enough. Wore shiny loafers that squeaked when he walked. Carried a tablet like it was a shield. Tried to make jokes with the guys, but they weren't buying it. You could see it in their eyes, they didn't trust him. Not yet. Maybe never. Matt shadowed me for most of the shift. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, but every question he asked confirmed what I already knew, he was in over his head. He didn't understand pressure tolerances. Didn't know how to interpret the sound of a motor under strain. Couldn't identify half the parts on the line without flipping through his tablet. At one point, he asked me why we didn't streamline the inspection protocols to save time. I stared at him. You ever seen a man lose a hand because someone skipped an inspection? He went quiet after that. As the weeks passed, the writing on the wall got bolder. Matt started taking over my duties piece by piece. Management kept feeding him data and charts, telling him what should work, and he bought into it. He questioned procedures I'd developed through years of hard-earned experience. He even suggested reducing the cooldown time on one of the sealant mixers, said it would boost throughput. I pushed back. That cooldown's there because without it, you get pressure expansion. You want to blow the housing clean off the mount. He blinked. The model didn't show that. No, I said. But the last guy who tried it walked out with second-degree burns and a face full of resin. The model wasn't there for that. Still, he kept pressing. And Adam Grace? He backed him at every turn. I was just the ghost of a previous system, someone to be phased out, tolerated for a little while longer. It wasn't just me they were changing. I saw it everywhere. The company used to care about longevity, about doing things right. We had a budget for preventative maintenance, scheduled downtime, proper safety drills. That all started slipping. They cut maintenance staff by a third. Moved some of the older guys to other departments, replaced them with temps who didn't know their way around a torque chart. Suddenly, safety became something we talked about more than something we did. I watched it all unfold like a slow-motion car crash. And the worst part? I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. I kept my head down, but I started paying closer attention. Watching the corners they were cutting. Documenting it. Every missed inspection, every skipped repair. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. But I had a feeling I'd need a record. Something real. Something they couldn't spreadsheet away. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not then, anyway. But I was looking for the truth. And somewhere in all this mess, I could feel it, rising like heat off the factory floor. They thought they were saving money. But they were building a bomb. My last official day as lead foreman came faster than I expected. The guys pitched in and got me a card. One of those oversized ones from the drugstore, signed with Sharpie. Nothing fancy, just their names and a few handwritten lines. You kept us safe, Jim. Hell of a run. Don't be a stranger. It meant more to me than anything Adam Grace or HR could have said. Those men weren't just co-workers, they were brothers. They'd trusted me with their lives. And I'd done my best not to let them down. There was no grand send-off. No speech. No plaque. Just a handshake from Matt that lasted a second too long and a final walk through the place I'd spent half my adult life inside. I didn't take anything from my locker except my thermos and an old photo of my crew from the late 90s, before half of them had gone gray or left for other plants. When I hit the parking lot, I didn't turn the key right away. I just sat there behind the wheel, staring at the factory's loading bays. The sun was low in the sky, throwing long shadows over the steel siding. That place used to feel alive. Today, it looked hollow. I finally started the engine and pulled out, turning left instead of right. I didn't want to go home. Not yet. I drove south, through the old industrial zone on the outskirts of town. Past where the Kaiser Mill used to be. Past the crumbling brick shell of the boiler works. Places my dad used to talk about like they were sacred. He worked his whole life in one of those buildings, came home every night covered in soot and sweat, always with a story about something that nearly went wrong and how they pulled it off anyway. I parked near the old steel yard and got out of the truck. The chain-link fence was rusted through in places, the gate hanging half open like even the locks had given up. The place had been empty for years, but I could still see it in my mind, men in hard hats, forklifts buzzing around, the rumble of freight trains in the distance. That used to be Middletown. Industry. Sweat. Pride. Now it was warehouses full of cheap imports and ghosted job boards. I stood there for a while, breathing in the silence. It felt like saying goodbye to something I couldn't quite name. Eventually, I made my way home. The house was quiet. Susan had left a casserole warming in the oven and a note on the counter that just said, "I'm proud of you." That nearly broke me more than the layoff did. I sat in the living room, turned off the TV, and just let the silence stretch. I didn't cry. Not really. But something inside me cracked open. Not from sadness, but from a deep, grinding sense of betrayal. Like something sacred had been sold off cheap. I kept thinking about everything I'd done for that company. The systems I built, the emergencies I headed off before they ever hit. Nobody saw those moments. But they mattered. I kept people alive. Kept the place running. And now? Now some kid with a marketing deck and a vision was taking it all apart. I could feel the anger growing in me, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that simmers low and slow, right in your gut. The kind that makes you sit up at night going over every conversation, every time you bit your tongue, every moment you let things slide because you thought maybe, just maybe, they'd come to their senses. I thought about walking away clean. Taking my pension and letting the place burn. Let them learn the hard way. But that wasn't me. That wasn't who I was. Still, I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to be the guy hovering around the factory like a ghost, hoping they'd need me again. I had my dignity, even if they couldn't see its worth. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something big. You don't get a place like that and expect it to keep running. You don't cut corners and expect the machines, or the people, to just play along. The floor had been holding its breath for months. And when it exhaled, someone was going to get hurt. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to be bitter. I wasn't going to shout into the void. I was going to be smart. Patient. Strategic. I pulled out an old yellow notepad from the drawer and started writing. Every time I remembered a cut safety measure, a skipped inspection, a piece of equipment patched instead of replaced, I wrote it down. I logged dates, names, who signed off on what, and where I saw corners being shaved. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the truth. Because someday soon, the math wouldn't work. The numbers would fail them. And when that happened, they wouldn't be able to say they didn't know. Not if I had anything to do with it. You don't always notice the cracks when they first appear. Sometimes they start as little shifts, barely perceptible, easy to write off. A late delivery here, a missed calibration there. But eventually, the cracks spread. And if no one's watching, if no one cares, they turn into something that can't be fixed with a wrench and a clipboard. After I left, I tried to stay out of it. I really did. I focused on the house. Fixed the fence. Cleaned out the shed. Took up walking in the mornings like Susan kept asking me to. But I still heard things. Old friends from the floor started calling me, quietly, cautiously, like they weren't supposed to. Guys I'd trained. Men I trusted. They told me about what was happening behind the factory walls. And it wasn't good. They cut the overtime for maintenance, Jim, one guy told me. Half the team's gone. We're holding stuff together with duct tape and prayer. They changed the chemical delivery protocols, another said. No secondary verification now. One guy signs off and that's it. They're skipping the stress tests on the welds. Says the software says it's fine. But I've seen cracks, Jim. I've seen them. I wasn't surprised. Just angry. Everything I had warned them about, the things Matt brushed off with his buzzwords and graphs, was starting to come true. But instead of fixing it, they doubled down. More automation. Less supervision. Safety briefings that used to take 30 minutes now lasted 10, and even that was treated like a chore. Adam Grace had brought in an outside consultant group, some firm from Chicago that specialized in production streamlining. They came in wearing suits, never set foot on the line, and walked away with a full report that basically said, do more with less. They cut costs like surgeons with dull scalpels, slicing into muscle thinking it was fat. The heart of the place was gone. No one trusted the new processes, but they were too afraid to speak up. You could feel the morale drop like air leaking out of a tire. Guys stopped laughing in the break room. They stopped talking altogether unless they had to. Because they knew if something went wrong now, there wasn't a net. It wasn't just bad management. It was deliberate neglect. They weren't running the factory anymore. They were squeezing it, wringing out every last dollar before it broke. And they were betting it would hold just long enough for the next earnings report. I'd seen this kind of thing before, during the buyout, a few years back. That's when everything started shifting. Greenfield used to be family-owned. Back then, you knew the guy upstairs. You saw him on the floor sometimes, asking questions, shaking hands. He cared, because his name was on the building. Because his dad built it. Because his kids would inherit it. But 5 years ago, they sold the company to a group of private investors. Said it was the right move for long-term growth. I didn't think much of it at the time, just figured we'd get new stationery and a fancier logo. I was wrong. The new owners didn't care about the factory. They cared about the returns. They brought in executives like Adam, guys who never got their boots dirty, and gave them marching orders, boost efficiency, raise margins, cut costs. And Adam did exactly that. He saw a floor full of aging machines and men with decades of experience, not as assets, but as liabilities. To him, I was a number. A line on a budget. An expense he could erase. And now Matt Thomas was following in his footsteps. Matt started introducing new workflow apps, digital dashboards, and cloud-based tracking systems. The kind of stuff that looked good in a boardroom but fell apart the moment something actually went wrong on the floor. He reduced the maintenance windows on equipment because the metrics show minimal risk. He approved sourcing lower-grade materials from new suppliers. He even shortened the onboarding period for new hires, cutting safety training in half to get people working faster. And no one stopped him. The worst part? The factory kept going. For a while, anyway. No explosions, no lawsuits. Just a slow grind of things getting worse, quieter, more dangerous. And the people working there? They were too tired to fight. Too worried about keeping their jobs. A few tried to push back, but they were labeled resistant to change. I knew that phrase. I'd heard it in my last performance review, tucked behind compliments and HR speak. It was corporate code for, "You're not obedient enough." I started compiling what I heard into that yellow notepad, now thick with entries. Dates, names, quotes. I even sketched out diagrams from memory of the equipment I knew was being mistreated. I couldn't walk back into the factory. But I could still watch. Still listen. Still prepare. Because sooner or later, the math would catch up with them. And when it did, I didn't want justice. I wanted proof. The thing about disasters is, they don't happen all at once. Not usually. They sneak in slowly, one overlooked repair, one skipped procedure, one cost-saving decision at a time. And by the time everyone realizes what's happening, it's already too late. I'd seen the signs before. Small leaks that hinted at bigger ruptures. Stress lines in welds. Vibration patterns that didn't feel right. Machines have a language, and after 2 decades, I understood every whisper. Every warning. So I started documenting everything I could. I wasn't inside the factory anymore, but I still had eyes. Former colleagues, quiet men who didn't trust management but trusted me, started feeding me information. Texts. Emails. A few even sent photos. "Hey Jim, they installed that new intake valve, wrong orientation." I flagged it. Matt told me to let it ride. Maintenance team skipped the thermal scan on line 3 again. Said they didn't have the time. The new guy in welding, he's fast, but he's sloppy. I caught 2 cold joints last week. They shipped the product anyway. I kept it all. Every detail. I created a logbook, handwritten, dated. Not because I thought I'd use it. But because I needed to know I wasn't imagining this. That I wasn't just some bitter old man shouting into the wind. But the more I documented, the more real it became. This wasn't just carelessness, it was systemic. Built into the new workflow. The push for agility was leaving safety in the dust. Inspections were treated like box-checking rituals. Maintenance windows were squeezed down to the minute. And worst of all, nobody was talking. Fear had replaced experience. Guys who used to speak up were now keeping their heads down, hoping they wouldn't be next on the chopping block. I didn't blame them. Most of them had mortgages, kids, medical bills. You don't speak truth to power when power's holding the pink slips. But I didn't work for them anymore. I started cross-referencing old SOPs, standard operating procedures, with what I was hearing. Highlighted differences. Noted what was being changed, and why. I even caught wind of a few new policies being pushed through without safety committee review. That used to be a big deal. Now, it was an afterthought. One night, I spread everything out across the kitchen table. My notepad, old manuals, emails printed out and highlighted, photos taken on the sly by guys who still wore their hard hats with pride. Susan came home, took one look at the mess, and just nodded. "You're building a case," she said. "I'm not trying to take them down," I told her. "I just want a record." She gave me that look, half admiration, half concern. "You're not the type to just let things go, Jim. You never were." She was right. It wasn't just about Greenfield anymore. It was about what it represented. A place where people gave their lives, literally and figuratively, for the job. A place where rules were written in blood, not ink. And now those rules were being erased by people who'd never turned a wrench in their lives. I started reaching out, quietly, to people outside the company. A guy I knew from the state's Occupational Safety Board. A retired inspector I used to work with on third-party audits. Just casual conversations. Nothing formal. But I dropped enough hints to let them know something wasn't right at Greenfield. "Keep me in the loop," one of them said. "If things escalate, we'll be ready." And I believed they would. But I also knew the wheels of oversight turned slow, especially when politics and corporate money got involved. That's why I didn't stop documenting. I started backing everything up digitally, storing it in encrypted folders, saving duplicates on a USB I kept tucked inside the garage beneath the old toolbox nobody ever touched. Because if something went wrong, and I believed it would, no one was going to say they didn't know. Not on my watch.